Welcome to Rigorous Curriculum Design Part 2. In this video, we are going to have an overview of power standards as well as depth of knowledge. So what are power standards? These are the standards that are essential for student success. They are the standards teachers will spend the most time emphasizing. They are selected based on three criteria. Endurance. Will the standard or indicator provide students with knowledge and skills that will be of value beyond a single test date? Leverage. Will this provide knowledge and skills that will be of value in multiple disciplines? And readiness for the next level of learning. Will this provide students with essential knowledge and skills that are necessary for success in the next grade level or the next level of instruction? Let's take a look at where the power standards are located in the curriculum design folder. I'm going to go into my drive. And go into the curriculum design folder. And you will see a folder that says Power Standards Final. When you open up the Power Standards folder, you are going to see your content area. You'll double click on that and you'll see a listing of all of the power standards for kindergarten through 12th grade. Also, this year we're going to be talking about depth of knowledge. Are we focusing on strategic thinking and are we extending thinking? So actually I'm going to go back here to this slide. When we're talking about power standards, this doesn't mean we don't teach all of the other standards, which we call supporting standards. There is a place for supporting standards within the curriculum, and they too need to be taught. However, when teachers are dealing with time constraints and a multitude of standards, the power standards are the essential standards that not only must be covered, but must be learned. So this year we begin phase 2 of the curriculum design process, which includes all of the teachers in grades K through 12 for English language arts, math, and social studies, working together on the unwrapping of power standards, writing big ideas and essential questions, and revising assessments. K through 5 teachers will be completing this work during grade level meetings. 6 through 12 teachers will be completing the unwrapping work during the first PLC of each month. A group of teachers from grades 6 through 12 will be enlisted to help revise finals for their courses. We need to understand what demonstration of the new Indiana College and Career Standards will look like before we can begin unwrapping the power standards. So depth of knowledge, or DOK, was used in the creation of test items. Therefore, it is important for educators to understand depth of knowledge and what it means for our instruction. We also keep hearing about rigor. That word is thrown around a lot. Depth of knowledge will help us understand what rigor means. So what is depth of knowledge? It's a process and criteria for analyzing alignment between standards and standardized assessments. It's the expectation that we have for students in the cognitive aspect. What do we want them to do with the expectations? So the tasks are grouped to reflect different levels of cognitive expectations required to complete a task. Again, we need to understand depth of knowledge due to new assessments that will require students to answer questions at higher levels than we have seen before. We need to ensure teachers understand these levels to help promote student achievement. This is the DOK chart. You have a copy of the DOK chart in your Google folder under Curriculum Design in the Unwrapping Power Standards folder. I'm going to show you where that is now. Again, if you go into your drive, go to Curriculum Design, Unwrapping Standards, you're going to see a DOK chart. When you open it, you can either print it to save, or you can just look at it online as well. You can pause the video now if you would like to open the document before moving on, and press play when you are ready to begin again. So looking at the depth of knowledge chart, depth of knowledge has 4 levels. I'm going to go back here. Each level is determined by the task, not by the grade level, not by the ability of the student. Items at DOK levels of 3 or 4 require more complex thinking about concepts of the content, and they also have a real-world context. At level 4, items will require research, investigation, and application over an extended period of time using multiple sources. Depth of knowledge is not a taxonomy like Bloom's. It is not the same as difficulty. It is about using verbs in context. Here's a table that gives the names of the 4 levels of depth of knowledge. We have level 1, recall and reproduction, 2, skills and concepts, level 3, short-term strategic thinking, and level 4 is extended thinking. So Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge are both about rigor, but they are not direct correlations. You can't say remembering in Bloom's taxonomy is the same as recall in Webb's depth of knowledge. Bloom is based on the verb. What type of thinking is needed to complete a task? Whereas Webb, or depth of knowledge, is focused on how deeply do you have to understand the content to successfully interact with it. So what we want to think about is what comes after the verb that makes a cognitive demand more rigorous. Even though it appears they line up very well, so when I'm looking across, I see remembering and understanding lines up very well with recall. Even though they line up very well, there is low-level understanding and understanding that can go deeper. There's low-level application as well as application that can go deeper. We're going to go into our curriculum design folder and access a DOK matrix document. You can pause the video here to find it, but let me show you where that would be located. It's going to be in your curriculum design folder under Unwrapping Standards, and it's the Hess DOK matrix. Okay. You can print this out to look at. I'm actually going to download mine, and then I'm going to rotate so I can take a better look at this. Okay, so this, if you take a look at this matrix, it shows Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge. And again, they're both about rigor, but we're going to take a closer look at this overview. This matrix is based upon work by Karen K. Hess, who is from the National Center for Assessment. She has created an overview of cognitive rigor in standards, curriculum, and assessments. Her work is used with a lot of states as well. So at the top of the matrix, you see the 4 levels of Bloom's. Okay, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. You see the 4 levels of depth of knowledge, levels 1 through 4. You have recall and reproduction, skills and concepts, strategic thinking, reasoning, and extended thinking. And then on the left column, you see Bloom's revised taxonomy. And again, they go from remember all the way up to create. Okay. So as you look at this matrix, you will notice that there are examples of depth of knowledge 1 through 4 in many of the Bloom's levels. For example, if I look at Bloom's level for understand here, I can go across the matrix and see understanding can be found in each level of depth of knowledge. So let's look at understand level 1. Compose and decompose numbers, evaluate an expression, locate points on a grid or number line, represents math relationships. So that's a level 1 depth of knowledge. But I can also go all the way up to a level 4 with understand. Explain how concepts or ideas specifically relate to other domains or concepts. Develop generalizations of the results obtained or strategies used and apply them to new problem situations. So that's under understand. I'm going to go up here, and I also want to take a look at analyze. So with analyze, here is the Bloom's column, but I also see analyze can be found in each level of DOK. Level 1 would be retrieve information from a table or graph to answer a question. And then level 4 would be analyze multiple sources of evidence or multiple works by the same author or across genres or time periods. Okay. So thinking about Webb's depth of knowledge, we see that under analyze there are 4 levels. We see with understand, there's 4 levels of understanding. Pause this video and discuss with your team the differences that you see between levels 1 and level 4. When you are ready to continue, press play. So when we're thinking about depth of knowledge, it's not about the verb. Depth of knowledge is not determined by the verb like Bloom's taxonomy, for example, understand, but it is determined by the context in which the verb is used and the depth of thinking required. So depth of knowledge is about what follows the verb. What comes after the verb is more important than the verb itself. Let's go ahead and fix that spelling error there. So let's look at an example. If I ask students to analyze this sentence to decide if capitalization has been used correctly, that's not a high cognitive process. A student who's been taught rules for capitalization is merely using the rule. So typically when I think of the verb analyze, I automatically think of Bloom's and think that's higher level. But when you're thinking of depth of knowledge, it goes beyond the verb. It's what you're asking them to do after the verb. So again, if a student knows their capitalization rules, this is not high rigor at all. So let's take the same verb at 3 different depth of knowledge levels. Describe the process of photosynthesis. Describe how the 2 political parties are alike and different. Describe the most significant effect of World War II on the nations of Europe. So remember, it's the intended student learning outcome that determines your depth of knowledge level. So you have to be thinking to yourself, what mental process must occur? So often we'll look at the verb first, and that might appear to point at a depth of knowledge level, but really it's what comes after the verb that's the best indicator of rigor or depth of knowledge level. So here's another example. We know adding is a mental process, and knowing the rule for adding is the intended outcome that influences depth of knowledge. Once someone learns the rule of how to multiply, 4 times 4 is a depth of knowledge 1, and it's also easy. But as you can see, multiplying larger numbers is still a depth of knowledge 1, but it may be more difficult. So we have to be careful talking about the difference between difficulty and rigor. So again, it's not about the difficulty. Let me give another example. If I had a depth of knowledge 1 question would be name the current president of the United States. Another depth of knowledge 1 would be name all of the presidents of the United States in chronological order and their political parties. It's still depth of knowledge 1, but it requires a little more effort. If I had an example, analyze the actions of several presidents which had the greatest impact on economic growth of the country. Well, that's a depth of knowledge 3 because the students are making judgments, evaluations, and they must use multiple sources. So looking at this next slide, again, depth of knowledge is not about difficulty, okay? Difficulty is a reference to how many students answer a question correctly. How many of you know the definition of difficulty? Well, that's a depth of knowledge 1, recall. If all students know the definition, that's an easy question. But if you ask a definition question, for example, how many of you know the definition of probability? That's depth of knowledge 1, recall. But if most students do not know the definition, that's a difficult question. So again, depth of knowledge is not about difficulty. So when I'm thinking about depth of knowledge and how it relates to state assessments and why I need to know this, it's important for us to consider depth of knowledge when we are unwrapping our standards for the fact that we need to know what task our students are going to be required to do. So every course and every grade level has standards that are measurable, and they also have standards that are eligible to be assessed. And that's what the state looks at. So when you get those assessment blueprints, when you go on the IDOE website and you can find your assessment blueprints, and that lays out for you what you should be covering or spending a lot of your time on, those are standards that are measurable. So we have standards that can be measurable and assessed, and then we have standards that cannot be tested. Of those that are able to be tested, you need to start assuming that a majority of test items will come from depth of knowledge levels 2 and 3. And that's what's being found from things like the PARCC assessment or the Smarter Balance assessment. So we're assuming right at this point that ISTEP is going to be right there too. So again, a majority of test items will come from depth of knowledge levels 2 and 3, and there's also an increase in depth of knowledge level 4 items. So now that we know that, we need to be able to prepare our students for these new assessments. So we want to spend a lot of our instructional time on depth of knowledge level 3. So we're going to take a closer look at that in just a second. ISTEP previously tested at levels 1 and 2. So the shift that is occurring is we are requiring our kids to do more rigorous cognitive tasks. And that's what depth of knowledge is all about. It's knowing what we are asking our students to do and where it falls in those 4 levels. So this shift requires us to make a change on a daily basis and to revise how we assess even in our own classrooms if we are to have students ready for the new assessments. So I want to go back real quick into our curriculum design folder, unwrapping standards. And I showed you the depth of knowledge chart, which you will be able to look at. There's also a depth of knowledge overview here. And I know it's sideways right now, but you'll be able to download it and spin it around just by clicking download, open it, go to view. I'm going to rotate that view. Maybe we'll rotate it again. There we go. This chart I feel will be beneficial to you. This chart will show you what level 1 some key verbs that you might see, and then the evidence of depth of knowledge. Because remember, the verbs can help trigger, but you can find those same verbs at all levels. It's what you're asking them to do following the verb. Okay? So you can see level 1, level 2. Again, you see calculate at level 1, but calculate can also be at level 2. The difference is, look at level 1, explaining simple concepts, and level 2 is solving routine multiple step problems. So again, it's what you're asking them to do following the verb, not the verb itself. That's the biggest difference between depth of knowledge and Bloom's. And then the second page will go on and show you some samples for level 3 and level 4. Then there's a further explanation of the levels of complexity, starting with the lowest level, level 1, which is recalling a fact, information, or procedure, and then you're processing at a low level. Whereas level 4, it's extended thinking. It requires connections, extensions. You're going to be using multiple sources, high cognitive demands, complex reasoning. So this chart will help you when you are thinking about your own instruction in your classroom and the types of questions that you are asking your students to tackle. Also in the folder is the Hess DOK matrix that we looked at. But not only does this have an overview, I'm going to pop in here again, a general overview, but we also have for different subject areas. So the very first page is a general look at depth of knowledge versus Bloom's. But if I scroll down, the second page is reading specifically. So I can see the matrix of Bloom's and Webb's DOK converging on this matrix for reading specifically. And then we have math and science. And the last one is social studies. So I thought these would be beneficial when you are designing maybe your own classroom assessments, or even just having discussions in the classroom, thinking ahead to what kinds of things you want to ask your students to answer, or projects. When you are developing projects, take a look at the DOK levels to determine, are you sticking more at level 1, or are you right in level 3 where we want most of our instructional time to be? Also in this Unwrapping Standards folder, you have the PowerPoint that we just went through. We also have the link to the very first video that you watched, which was from Powtoon. It was a curriculum design overview. And here, for those of you who really want to get into Webb's depth of knowledge, this is a guide that I downloaded. It was, I borrowed it from the internet. So it's mde.k12.ms.us. And this again goes into very specific details about each level and potential activities. So I thought this would be of a benefit to you as well. So again, why am I telling you about depth of knowledge? Well, I'm telling you about it because we are going to see more in our assessments that are aligned to depth of knowledge 3. Specifically, when the test questions are being written, they are using depth of knowledge to help create these questions and figure out how many are in each level. And again, we need to really be focusing our instruction on that level 3. Also, being able to understand that our kids have to be able to do levels 1 and 2 before they can move on to level 3. So keep that in mind as well. But in terms of assessments in general, for our standardized assessments, we really want to look at levels 3. We're going to see more emphasis on that. So what is next? The next time you meet for PLC, we're going to start with unwrapping the power standards. So this was just an overview of the big picture, why we're doing what we're doing, and the things that we need to consider. So the next time we meet, I'm actually going to go through the unwrapping power standards process as well as assign you duties, things that you will need to accomplish during your PLC time. So I hope that the overview has been beneficial. I know it's a lot of information, it's a lot to take in, but you can watch and rewatch these as you wish. If you'd like a script of what I said instead of looking at the video again, go ahead and email me. I can get you that as well. Um, but overall, I'm excited to begin this process. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, today was just an overview of everything, and we'll get into the nitty gritty the next time you meet. So I will talk to you all later, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.